Well, from the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, welcome to this very special edition, this very special program where Brazil decides upon its political future. I'm Soini Gray.
And I'm Ian Bruce.
Over the last half hour, nearly 95% of the votes have been tallied. The far-right candidate Jair Bolsonaro is ahead of his opponent, Fernando Haddad. So we're still going to ask, will Brazilians really choose to elect the far-right candidate, Jair Bolsonaro, who won the first round and has been leading all the opinion polls, a man who many have described as a proto-fascist? Or will they opt to return to the legacy of the Workers' Party governments of Lula da Silva and Dilma Rousseff by electing Fernando Haddad? 95% of the votes are in, but we can still check. We'll know very soon, probably in the next few minutes. It's an election that has huge implications, not just for Brazil, but for the entire region and across the globe. So to discuss the election and the results, we have a number of guests from Brazil and beyond. We have Sabrina Fernandes. She's a sociologist at the University of Brasilia, and she's a political activist. And we're also going to be joined by João Freitas. He's the director of the Political Science Institute at the State University of Rio de Janeiro. Ian, why is this election so important?
Well, I think the numbers speak for themselves, Soini. You know, everybody thought this was a hugely important election for Brazil before the first round. Two very different visions of the future of Brazil pitted against each other. In the second round, the stakes were even higher because of that surprising lead that Jair Bolsonaro took in the first round, and that seems to be confirmed now. 96% of the votes counted, over 55% for Bolsonaro, 45% for Haddad. That's pretty well irreversible. So it looks like the Brazilians have indeed gone the way the polls were suggesting, and that's a huge, huge, huge leap in the dark.
As you say, this is a huge leap in the dark. We have photos here of, I believe it's, whose supporters? Bolsonaro supporters in Sao Paulo. So, in Rio de Janeiro. So we are looking at streets that are literally packed full of people, and celebrations have begun. I mean, at 95% of the results, there's really no way for anyone to take it over at this point. So the decision has been made. So what we are going to be discussing now with our panel is how did Brazil reach to this point and what this means. But first, we need to go to our correspondent in Sao Paulo, Brian. Brian May is there, and we want to touch base with him to kind of see what the mood is like at the moment and what the day has been like, and what Brazilians are saying their future is going to be like. Brian, are you there?
Yes, I am. How's it going?
I'm good, Brian. How are you going?
Well, it's a pretty shocking day here in Brazil. I didn't think I would live to see this moment when it appears that the military is taking the country back. As 96% of the votes are in, mathematically there's no way for a to win the election.
Okay, so Brian, for the sake of context, let's paint a picture of how this day has been. How did we reach to this point today?
Well, basically they arrest each candidate for president on trumped up charges with no material evidence. He was charged with committing undetermined act. And then from behind bars, disobeying an order by the United Nations. And so it put the PT party in an uncomfortable position of having to select another candidate at the last minute. This was coupled with massive electoral fraud through the WhatsApp social app. Millions of dollars thrown to a slush fund for Jair Bolsonaro, was supported by Steve Bannon, spreading hate and lies through the internet to targeted segments of the population, typically evangelical Christian, with lies such as that Fernando Haddad was a child molester, that the PT was going to transform all of the children in Brazil gay, and it worked. Bolsonaro won.
Okay, so Brian, thank you so much for that update. We appreciate that from you. So Ian, how are you feeling?
Well, it's not up to me what I feel, but I mean, obviously the people standing there behind Brian in the PT headquarters in Sao Paulo must be really disappointed and concerned, very concerned about the future of their country.
So for the sake of, maybe breaking it down a bit too much for our audience, but just for the sake of clarity, why is this such a worrying decision? Why is this such a dark decision for Brazil?
Well, obviously we'll have to see whether Jair Bolsonaro, assuming he does take on the presidency, actually implements and follows the kind of policies and rhetoric, more than policies, that he's been promoting throughout this campaign. But if he does, what that means effectively is a serious questioning of the basic rules of the democratic game that have been installed in Brazil since the end of the military dictatorship in 1985. So we're talking about 30 years, over 30 years, of more or less stable democracy in Brazil. And Jair Bolsonaro has questioned some of the very fundamentals of that. I mean, quite apart from the individual rights and the attacks on women, on gays, on LGBT people and trans people and blacks, and even the whole section of the country, the nordestinos, the people from the northeast. He's also questioned, the democratic process itself. And I think that's what people are going to be really, really worried about. Is he going to follow through on that? Is he, his son, all right, he stepped away from it, but just last week a video was published of his son saying, well, if the Supreme Court of Justice rules against his father in any case, it would only take a corporal and one soldier to close down the Supreme Court.
Yeah, very scandalous language, very scandalous language. Okay, so we have 96% of the votes already in. Jair Bolsonaro with 55.5% and Fernando Haddad at 44.5%. Now, we have seen this before, the rise of populism, because that's basically what they're linking the support and the success of Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil to that. We've also seen, in terms of a bright side, we've also seen the rise of the left in terms of activism and political engagement. And this is something that you've seen in the US and other places where they've had populist governments.
I think Bolsonaro is speaking now, Soini. Maybe we should go to that. Do we have audio?
Em cada lugar do Brasil que me estive presente.
Delegate Brazil, who said present. This is more gratificant than any operation. But those who had thirst of truth and to talk with somebody who knew what was going on and had respect and consideration, going to the house, I want to say thank you to all of you for all the support and for the consideration, for the orations, and for the confidence. We'll go together to change the destiny of Brazil. We knew where we were going, now we know where we want to go. My dear Brazilian people, I am very thankful for the confidence.
So that was Jair Bolsonaro there. I believe he was declaring victory. He was talking about, my dear Brazilians, we move towards the future together. So a lot of conciliatory language, which we started hearing him tone down as he moved, as the week progressed towards today's election.
Yeah, it certainly sounded like, I mean, we had a bit of problems with the audio there, but it certainly sounded like he was declaring himself the victor. Yeah, you're right. In the last few days, he did tone down the rhetoric a tiny bit. A tiny bit. And some people said that was because he was slipping slightly in the polls. I suppose it would be normal in a victory speech. I don't know if he's going to give a longer speech later in the evening, quite possibly. But, it would be normal to sort of make some conciliatory noises. But,
we started to get a little bit of that. I detected a little bit of that in his speech just now. So clearly, he is aware that despite having won, this race has been very acrimonious because it has divided Brazil quite a bit. And when you listen, it's not even a matter of, people are moderate. They're either violently opposed to Jair Bolsonaro or they are passionate about him. And that creates a level of friction that they say Brazil has not experienced for a while. So very interesting elections in Brazil. But then again, like we've been discussing, the rise of populism throughout the world has, we've been seeing these sort of, you're either violently for or violently against. Again, overhead shots of the Bolsonaro campaign headquarters in Rio de Janeiro.
Yeah,
Massive
you can see
crowds
a
there.
massive crowd turning out there. They're obviously, a day of celebration for them.
I can't even fathom that amount of people. That's a lot. That's, really thick with,
Yeah.
really interesting elections.
I think we have Sabrina with us now. Sabrina Fernandez from Brasilia.
Hello.
Hi, Sabrina. Your reactions to these very swift and apparently very clear results.
Yes, he has been elected. Jair Bolsonaro has been elected. We're close to 98% polls being counted so far. That's enough for us to know that he has been elected. He's the president of Brazil starting January.
So, Sabrina, are you at all shocked that Bolsonaro has been elected?
This was sort of expected. What we were trying to do for the past few weeks is trying to close the gap a little bit. We had a feeling that we might be able to close the gap by talking to people, but we do know that he's very powerful and his campaign has backed fake news a lot. Even yesterday, there were spreading fake news about Nazi, so that made things quite complicated for us. It really did take a page out of Donald Trump.
Yes, he really did take a page out of Donald Trump's book. Can we talk about why Bolsonaro has been so attractive despite some of the really offensive things that he has said throughout his campaign and even prior to launching this political campaign? He's been labeled as a racist, he's been labeled as a misogynist, he's been labeled as a homophobe, and yet he has been elected. Why are Brazilians still supporting him?
There are mixed reasons for supporting him. Some people have supported him precisely because they're also homophobic, they're also racist. But we have to be careful with this because not the majority of the people who elected him. This is mostly people who are directly engaged in his campaign. But for people electing him, people who believe that he's not corrupt, that he's honest, he's a patriot, that would put the country back in order, you have to put in the context of the economic crisis in Brazil. There is a lot of unemployment on. Our public services are going through a really bad period right now, but people don't really associate that with the plans of austerity that came out with Hammer. They actually associate the public services so bad with corruption, and Jair Bolsonaro would be very tough on corruption, even though he had been involved in corruption before. But the thing right now is that the media, the judiciary, they have been very involved in the Workers' Party corruption. So a lot of people voted for Bolsonaro just because they didn't want the Workers' Party back in power. And they actually associate economic crisis with the Workers' Party, even though the Lula mandate was some of the stronger mandates economically in a really long time.
Sabrina, I wanted to switch over to the other side a little bit now. I mean, what we have seen in the last few days, a fairly impressive swelling of protests and demonstrations from all sorts of different sectors against this rise of the far right. And a lot of people seem to be feeling that that in itself was an important gain for the left. Obviously now the election has been lost. What will that mobilization, what legacy, what's left from that mobilization of the last few days now, do you think?
Over the past weeks, we have seen really important in Brazil, which is people mobilizing without depending on the party. Maybe people who weren't party militants at all, people who were not involved in the party, but they decided to go to the streets, talk to the working class, other people about the threat that also poses to Brazil. So that means a level of engagement in the streets that we hadn't seen in a time. And it wasn't just protests, it wasn't just demonstrations. It was actually based, which is quite incredible. I think it's something we have to keep going with this, and we have to resist in any way possible. We do know that Bolsonaro promised to fight posters. He said that any opponents who sending his way, they will have to either go away, go abroad, or jail. So this is something very serious. This is something of a fact shown, and it actually pushed a lot of right-wing people who believe themselves to be Democrats to vote for the Workers' Party, to try to stop Bolsonaro. So there's something going on in terms of anti-fascism in Brazil right now, and we have to keep going with that. We have to bet on it, and it's about survival at this.
Sabrina, thank you so much for chatting with us. We'll probably come back to you a little later on in the program. But first, we want to let our viewers know how we got to this point, what happened in the first round 3 weeks ago. So we have compiled a little report that packages up the Brazilian elections very neatly so that you can understand how we got here.
Thank you.
A tumultuous election campaign initially dominated by the legal battles of jailed former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. Even as he's out in jail, the Workers' Party nominated him for the presidential candidacy. But it was now a race against time as Lula's attorneys launched appeal after appeal in a bid to get him on the ballot before the registration deadline. The Supreme Court would eventually bar his candidacy. With Lula out of ticket, Fernando Haddad will have less than 1 month to win over Lula's diehard supporters.
I have an announcement to make for you all. Sunday, we're going to win the election. Sunday, we're going to win the election. I have no doubt about what I'm saying. It's in the air. Since yesterday, I've been feeling change in the air. We're beginning to grow, and Jair Bolsonaro is beginning to fall. He's going to start trembling. He's going to start trembling.
Haddad claimed in polls as he squared off with candidates. At the same time, the far-right candidate was gaining popularity. Tens of thousands of protesters did not take this lightly. They took to the streets across Brazil as part of an anti-Bolsonaro not-hit mobilization. Nearly 4 million people also joined a Facebook group called Women United Against Bolsonaro.
As you can see in this protest, there are white, black, homosexual people, people who are father and mother, very diverse people. And this type of candidate and this type of policy does not represent Brazilian culture.
I'm here so that people wake up, for them to think. That's what we need, that people stop and think.
Many believe Bolsonaro's campaign was boosted after he was nearly stabbed to death at a rally. He leapt ahead in the polls in late August with a 10-point lead ahead of Haddad.
Polls indicate that in the middle class, Bolsonaro has 50% of the voting intentions. These center-right voters who voted for the Social Democratic Party have radicalized and today support Bolsonaro, not for his ideas, nor for his program, but rather by a common aversion to the left.
Less than 1 week to the first round election, the polls showed Bolsonaro in the lead, enjoying about 32% of voters' intentions. Behind him was Haddad with 22%. In the end, Bolsonaro took the first round with 46% of votes, against Fernando Haddad's 29%.
So Jair Bolsonaro is addressing his supporters. Let's go to him now.
I always felt the presence of God and the strength of Brazilian people. The speech of women and whole families that in front of the menace of going through a way that is not what Brazilians deserve. Our love Brazil will be over everything. I'll give you my testimony that this government will be the defendant of the Constitution, the democracy and liberty. This is a promise, not from a party. It's not the word from a man. It's before God that I say this. The liberty will make us free. Liberty will make us in a big nation. The liberty will be a light that guided us up until here, and that will continue illuminating our road. What happened today in the polls was not the victory of a party, but the celebration of a country for the liberty. Our compromise that we make with Brazilians is to make a decent government, promoting the country and our people. And I'll guarantee that it is how it will go. Our government will be made by people who has the main proposition that is listening to me in that moment. The proposition of transformation Brazil in a big, free and prosperous nation. You can have the certainty that will work night and day for that. Liberty is a principle, a fundamental principle. Liberty of living and being in the streets in every space of the country. liberty for being defended, political and religious liberty, liberty to have an opinion, liberty to make options and be respected for them. This is a country for all of us, Brazilians from born here or from heart, different positions. As defendant of liberty, I'll guide a government that represents and defends the liberties of the citizens and to defend the laws. They are for all, because like that will be our government, constitutional and democratic. I believe in the capacity of Brazilian people who works in an honest way, that together we can, government, society, construct a better government. That future that I talk and that I believe is for a government that makes conditions so everybody can grow. And it means that the federal government will give a step back, reducing its structure and bureaucracy, cutting these privileges so people can make steps into the front. Our government will break paradigms, we will have confidence in people, we will permit that citizens, those who are entrepreneurs, have more possibilities to construct a new future. We will untie Brazil and we will break a new paradigm that the government will literally respect the federation. People live in municipalities, so the federal resources will go from the central government to states and municipalities. We will rise again the Brazilian Federation. We repeat that we need more Brazil and less Brasilia. A lot of what we're founding in this moment is about what we will do in the future. The seeds will be spread, so prosperity will be for Brazilians now and for the future. This will be a government or response of the immediate necessities. The reforms that we are proposing is to create a future for Brazilians. And when I say this, I talk with a hand for the Amazonian forest and another hand for the entrepreneurs creating a new enterprises. There are not Brazilians from north and Brazilians from south. We are all one only nation, a democratic nation. The democratic state and right state has 4 pillars. The property, which is a constitutional principle and foundation of principal democratic nations in the world. We promote jobs and better fiscal so we can make more opportunities for everybody. We will break the vicious circle of the debt growing, less deficits and less interest rates. This will stimulate the generation of employment. The public deficit will be eliminated as soon as possible and will be made in super habit. This is our purpose.
Well, we just saw a very triumphant Jair Bolsonaro addressing his fans and his supporters, and I guess trying to sound presidential and addressing the rest of Brazil. We have congratulations coming in. Enrique Peña Nieto, the current president of Mexico, just offered his congratulations. My Spanish is terrible, Ian. I'll let you translate that.
In the name of the people and government of Mexico, I congratulate Jair Bolsonaro for his election as President of the Federative Republic of Brazil in an exemplary day that reflects the strength of democracy in that country.
Yeah. We've heard congratulations coming in also from Mauricio Macri of Argentina.
Again, congratulations to Jair Bolsonaro for the triumph in Brazil. We hope to work together soon for the relationship between our countries and the well-being of both Argentinians and Brazilians.
And I think we have one more.
That's Mauricio Macri, no.
But
But I know that
Sebastián
Piñera, the Chilean president, has also sent his congratulations. So, not surprising, if you like, the sort of the better-known figures on the right in Latin America, quick to congratulate Jair Bolsonaro. Of course, Peña Nieto won't be in office for very much longer. No. Beginning of December, he hands over, curiously, to a left-leaning president. So, some interesting dynamics coming up in the region, I think.
Yes. So Jair Bolsonaro gave a very interesting speech just now, and he said something about more Brazil and less Brasilia. What could he mean by that?
I think what he's meaning, and this is kind of a mantra for part of the right, is less central government, more power to the regions, okay. more power to local government, more power to state governments, and so forth. So that's not a particularly surprising remark.
We have João Ferreira on the line. He is the head of the Political Science Institute at the at
the State University
of Rio de Janeiro. Yeah. Correct.
That's right.
So, João, let me ask you to jump in and comment on that. He said something about more Brazil and less Brasilia. So Ian was saying, Ian gave his interpretation. Help me understand what that could possibly mean.
Yeah, I beg to disagree with him because he didn't mean more power to local, governed and municipalities. He's talking about diminishing the state, cutting on social policies, cutting the overall governmental expenditure.
João, how are you feeling with these results? Because I remember speaking to you a few weeks ago, and that was an interesting conversation. So I just do need to ask you, how are you feeling? What is your initial response when you see these results?
My personal feeling?
Yes, both. Personal and
horrible,
professional.
Awful. I mean, the extreme right candidate running a campaign on, hatred speech manages to win the election. Yeah, that's pretty bad for Brazil. But saying that, Bolsonaro actually ran a very atypical campaign. He, at the same time, he would say something very radical to the right and then say also something more moderate, like the speech he just gave. So, the messages were very confusing. So people who voted for Bolsonaro, who support him, would use one or another, argument in order to buff the critics.
João, I wanted to ask you, the result is obviously absolutely clear, but what about the margin? Because in the last few days, it did seem like Fernando Haddad was making up a little bit of ground. We saw that huge swell of protests of different sorts in different parts of the country. And there was kind of a feeling that, well, maybe he'll win, but maybe he won't really win by such a big margin, and that will make life a little bit more difficult for him. But, it's a clear 10%. What do you make of that?
Well, yeah, but a clear 10% in a face-off type of election means basically 5%, right? Because if you conquer 5%, you pass the other candidate. So I think that Haddad was on the rise. And if he had an extra week of campaign, he might have passed Bolsonaro, because Bolsonaro's campaign was showing some signs of stress. But, the election was actually short. The campaign period was short in 2016 by Congress. And we had to face a very short period of election in which, the time that the candidates had to pass their message was diminished. And then Bolsonaro, on top of that, ran a campaign in which he did not participate in any public debate. So it was very typical.
João, I'm seeing some other figures here which are quite interesting on the level of abstention and blank votes. 21%, over 21% abstention. And this is in Brazil, where voting, of course, is obligatory by law. And 7.5% of blank votes. And at the same time, according to these figures I've got here, Haddad's vote increased by some 13 million, and Bolsonaro's by 6 million. Of course, they would both naturally increase in the second round because there weren't any other candidates. But you know, what about that lack of participation by a substantial part of the electorate? What does that mean?
I don't have the data here with me, but it seems to me that this rate of non-voters is not very typical, and the rate of blank votes are not atypical either. You know, in Brazil, voting is obligatory, but people pay a very small fee when they vote, when they do not vote. So, you know, in practice, it's not that mandatory, you know. Yeah.
Joao, you were just saying that you think it was entirely possible that if we had another week to go, Fernando Haddad might have had a greater presence or maybe could have won. Are you seeing?
Haddad, I think Joao, sorry, I think we're going to have to break out of this because I'm told Haddad is just speaking now.
Millions of Brazilians in the streets defending the democracy and the rights of the people. So Brazil could be happy again. We have with us right now part of that people who fought and will continue to fight for the liberty, for equality, and for peace, and for solidarity, and for the well-being of everybody. I ask to you to stay, to stand up, and to make 1 minute of silence. A minute of silence so we can fight again for our democracy. It's an homage for the defendants of human rights that in this war were killed by this hatred. Mariel Franco, Mestre Moro Catendero, and Cayone Alexis Albuquerque.
Eu me reconecto.
I'm reconnecting. I am reconnecting to the energy of the great water Chibibico to say that alone we are strong, but together we are unbreakable. And now we will listen to Fernando Haddad so we can continue together in this fight. Good night for all of you.
Eu tô com ela, eu tô com Lula, Haddad e Manuela, eu tô com ele, eu tô com ela, eu tô com Lula.
I'm with him, I'm with her, I'm with Lula, with Haddad and Manuela. Stella and Manuela.
Duca, que está aqui presente
Duca,
com a gente hoje.
who is also here with us.
Você conosco.
It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Meus filhos, minha mãe,
My children, my mother, Carolina, Federico, Dona Norma, my sisters, Lucia, Priscilla, all of the companions here of all of the parties. Hello to Guilherme Boulos, who was candidate to the Republic too. Companions from the PSDB, do PROS, do PSOL, do PSB, who were with us. President Dilma, who is here with us, thank you very much. Senator Suplicy, our deputies, our senators. In first place, I would like to, because of my formation, to say thank you to my people from the past. I learned from them the the value to defend justice. I learned from my parents and from my grandparents that courage is a big value when you live it in society, because all of the other values depend on it. I want to thank all the parties that were with us for your militancy, very strong, that take us to the second turn, and then took us to more than 45 million of votes today. An expressive part of the Brazilian people that must be respected in this moment. It has a divergency from the majority and has another project of Brazil in the head and needs the respect. I know in between these 45 million of electors that were with us right now, many are not from a political party, they are not from an association. Mainly the last week, it was mainly the feast of democracy, the party of democracy, the people who went into the streets with the husband, with the wife, and started to paper the whole country and sit in a bank, in a place, and started to talk and started to change what was seen during the first week of the second term. And there was a reversion very big of a big part of the Brazilians of what was in game, and there is a lot that is in game. We had a big period, a long period, that in institutions were improved every moment, starting in 2016 when we had the impeachment on President Dilma, after the unjust prison of President Lula, the destruction of his registration of his candidacy, the respect in the UN, but we continued with the head held high, with determination and with courage, because we're taking our message to draw the country, to the city and to the country, in the centers and the peripheries, to everybody, LGBT, women and men, white and black, Catholic and evangelicals, those who have another religions, to all of the Brazilians. With determination, we went to whole of Brazil to take the message that it's necessary to take, that the national sovereignty and democracy, as we understand it, is a value that's higher than any of us. We have a nation that we are going to defend it from those who, in an unrespectful way, pretend to take the patrimony of the Brazilian people, and we understand democracy not only as a formality, even if that is very important to remember right now in Brazil, the civilian rights, the political rights, and the workers' rights, and the social rights who are in the table right now. So we have a huge homework, a huge task, that in name of democracy we have to defend the thought and the liberties of those 46 million of Brazilians that were with us up until now. We have the responsibility of doing an opposition, putting the national interests of the whole Brazilian people above everything, because we have a compromise with the prosperity of the country, that we have that we constructed the best democracy in Brazil. We have a compromise of maintaining that and don't accept provocations and threats. You will see that the nation making, remember our national hymn. You will see how a professor won't flee the fight. Nor he will be afraid of those the person who loves liberty doesn't fear the death. We have a compromise with our country, and we have a long trajectory of militancy and public life, and we recognize the citizenship in any Brazilian women and men, and we won't let this country behind. We will put it on top of everything, and we will defend our points of view, respecting democracy, respecting institutions, but without putting our point of view on what is at stakes in Brazil from now. And there is a lot of things at stakes, and we'll understand what is at stakes. We'll make a faith that will continue our walk, talking with people, reconnecting with the bases, reconnecting with the poor people of this country, to remake a nation program that will be who will sensibilize people. We will guarantee the institutions. We will not get away from our professions and offices, but we will not stop being citizens. We will be exercising this citizenship, and Brazil has never needed this exercise of citizenship than now. I put my life for this country, and I talk for millions of people who will put the country over our lives and the well-being of those people. And for those who I saw in the streets in this country, I felt anguish and fear in the eyes of these people who were crying. Don't be afraid. We will be here. We are together. We will be hands held, and we'll embrace the cause of you. You can count on us. Courage. The life is made by courage. Long live Brazil. Long live Brazil.
So we were just listening to Fernando Haddad there, conceding defeat, we have to say.
Indeed, yeah. And he was, obviously downbeat, but he did make a couple of interesting points there, that 45 million people voted for the Workers' Party candidate, for him. And he said those voters need to be respected. He said we have a responsibility as an opposition to protect Brazilian democracy, to protect Brazilian institutions, and that will be the challenge for them in Parliament. But obviously it's going to be a difficult task, and I think we need to look at what the Congress will mean. It would be interesting to talk about that with some of our other guests a little bit further into the program. But I think, are we going to some news now?
Yes, we're supposed to have Estefania Bravo on standby to give us a bit of a news update in the middle of the program. We just went back to shots of the Haddad camp, being really brave in the face of defeat. But it should be interesting to see how Brazil responds to these results in the next few days. But we are going to hand over to Estefania Bravo for a short news update.
Thank you, Sayini. Far-right Jair Bolsonaro has been elected as president of Brazil. According to the country's Supreme Electoral Court, with 99% of votes counted, Jair Bolsonaro has taken the lead with 55% of the vote. Meanwhile, Fernando Haddad of the Workers' Party has so far won 44% of the vote. We will continue to update you as more information comes out. Meanwhile, more news now. The president of Brazil's Supreme Court has spoken out about the need of the elected president to respect the Constitution and more so the opposition.
The future president must respect the institutions, must respect democracy and the democratic state of law, the judicial power, the National Congress and the legislative power. The future president must also guarantee the political plurality like stated in the constitution, also respecting the opposition that will be formed. Those who don't manage that must be respected too, because society has different forces and together we form the nation.
And some states also went to a second round of voting in order to elect a governor. There will be just one woman holding the office of state governor in all of Brazil, as Fátima Becerra from the Workers' Party has been elected. Becerra will be governor of Rio Grande do Norte, having been elected today with nearly 60% of the votes. Polls opened at 8 a.m. local time in Brazil, where 147 million eligible voters decided over the fate of their country in this second-round presidential runoff. Besides the president, governors for 13 states and the federal district are being elected. Voters also cast their ballots for 19 mayors. And based on the numbers we have now, Bolsonaro picked up 6 million votes since the first round, and Fernando Haddad added an impressive 13 million votes in this round. Today's election saw 21% abstention and with 7.4% spoil votes according to the numbers so far. Supporters of the Workers' Party have reacted to the results that gave far-right candidate Jair Bolsonaro a lead with 55.7% of the vote. Despite Fernando's best efforts to close the gap by increasing his campaign by engaging with the electorate, Bolsonaro still managed to maintain his lead. This election has been one of the most contentious ever given. Bolsonaro's racist, misogynist, and homophobic views, which sparked worldwide protests. Reactions are pouring in for Jair Bolsonaro, including the president of Argentina, Mauricio Macri, and Mexico. Both presidents have congratulated him on his victory. People gathered outside the Brazilian embassy in London under the slogan "Ele now or not him." Holding banners and purple slogans, they protested against Jair Bolsonaro. And in Paris too, a long line of Brazilian voters formed outside the embassy. Almost all of them broke into chants of "Ele não" against Jair Bolsonaro. Some breaking news coming out of El Salvador, where a 6.1 magnitude earthquake has struck. This according to the U.S. Geological Service. We will keep you updated as we get more information.
Thank you so much for that update, Estefania Bravo. As you can see, we're being joined on set by Fernando Casado. He's a political analyst and who teaches at the Central University here in Quito. And we are supposed to have Breno Altman on the line via Skype, but since, Fernando, you're here, these results, how are you feeling?
Well, these were predictable results, right? We all hoped that it could be reversed, but the difference between Bolsonaro and Haddad was big, too big to be fulfilled by Haddad. I guess that now what we have to focus on is analyzing the different scenarios that open for Latin America. What we are having now is completely original and new. We have never had such a rightish populist government, especially in the main economy and the main country and the most populated country of Latin America. So I guess that now, what is next? We have Macri in Argentina, we have also problems in Ecuador with a rightist government that was disguised. Now we have also Bolsonaro in Brazil. So probably what we are going to see and experiment for the first time is a setback in all the social achievements that were accomplished till now.
But just let me jump in there, Fernando, because do you think Bolsonaro is just another right-wing government in Latin America, or is this actually qualitatively different?
Well, some people have described him as Trump of the tropic, right? So I would say that it's a populist, rightish government, that it's extremely xenophobic and misogynist, and that's something new in the region, right? Because we could see neoliberal policies, but now what we are going to see is, together with neoliberal policies, probably many scapegoats, I would say. Like we will see like the harassment of minorities, discrimination for political ideas, discrimination for gender, and then that's something that it's a very, very bad setback. And together with that, we'll see also probably the dismantlement of the social network in Brazil, the privatization of several companies in this country. And also what they want to do is to eliminate the disarmament law from 2006 that was passed by referendum back then. And now probably what we see is rearmament in a country where there are over 16,000 homicides a year. We'll see most prison population in the fourth country with more population in jail. So those things are also like big social problems that I'm sure are going to increase right now. And this is something that will also affect the rest of the region in the sense that we'll probably see also a setback in the integration process. We'll probably see also how, and Bolsonaro has said that already, he's going to move away from China and get closer to, in this privatization process, to the US. So probably the US is going to get back its backyard, right?
Okay.
Its backyard.
Sorry. But I know a lot of people are very worried about the rise of populism, but one of the positives or the silver linings that persons have been pointing out is the rise of civil society, because politics hasn't gone the way that they want to, or people are seeing this increasingly aggressive and negative and racist, homophobic, etc., politics, that persons are now realizing we need to get involved in the political process. So we saw the LA Now protest and in Brazil, and we saw that more people are coming out and calling him out on his LGBT issues. We saw evangelicals coming out and saying, no, you don't represent us. Is it possible that that's enough to stem the tide or even hold his hand throughout his presidency?
Hopefully yes, but I would say that even if the Ela Now or Not Him movement has been very strong, and that has also mobilized a lot of people in conscience, I would say that once you turn power into someone like Bolsonaro, and he will get now all the different powers in the country, because he also has a big majority at the Chamber of Deputies and also the Senate, I would say that it's going to be very difficult, especially in the beginning. We'll see also if Bolsonaro is going to put in practice or not his harassment against these movements, against the Ela Now movement, against the movement without shelter, and the rest of the social movements. And then we'll see if there is an organization and the increase of the organization of this civil society, which is really, really important right now to stop all these neoliberal policies. But at the moment I would say that it's very difficult, because once you get into power, once you get all the different powers, the legislative, also the judiciary in a way is with Bolsonaro, because it's a very conservative power, and also when you have the executive power, this is going to be very difficult to stop. Especially because this, in the first round, he got a very big difference with the rest of the candidates, and he got a wide majority in the different chambers, and that will also make the way very easy for him to pass neoliberal laws, the disarmament law, to eradicate or eliminate the disarmament law, and to impose his rightish populist neoliberal agenda. And that's going to be very difficult. But as a result, we might see, as you were proposing, a very flourishing civil society. But we'll see. It's going to be very difficult. Hopefully also the majority of the population will realize that this candidate, which currently did not appear in any presidential debate for the first time in Brazilian, since Brazil returned to democracy, will probably realize that this was really a media product, a marketing, a marketing that was very not the right option for the majority of the population, but we'll see how it gets out afterwards.
Okay, so we have Breno Altman on the line. He's a well-known journalist and commentator. He's also the director of Opera Mundi, which is the website. Breno, are you there? Hi.
Yes, I'm here. Good evening.
And how are you responding to the results today?
Fine. I think we have to think about who is Bolsonaro. I think he is furthermore than a rightist populist. And I think that's not correct to compare him with Macri or with Trump. Bolsonaro is another kind of politician. At this time, he is the leader of a new fascist wing in Brazil. It's another kind of political organization, another kind of political project. Is a danger to democracy, to social rights. He is a kind of institutional Pinochet. He represents a way to dictatorship melting with a liberal agenda, a ultra-liberal agenda. He is very different, even if compared to the Argentinian democracy. And it's very important to analyze exactly what Bolsonaro represents. It's the first time since the 30s in the last century that Brazil has a fascist wing. And this fascist wing has social support among middle class. He has some kind of melting pot between army and some Pentecostal Christian church. Is a kind of identity which project is to change a very deep change to Brazilian political system.
Breno, can I
That's the way I think we have to analyze Bolsonaro.
Breno, I'd just like to jump in on that because you talked about Bolsonaro coming from a small fascist movement, but I'm just wondering how that's going to play out institutionally now, because in Congress, the PSL and its allies grew from almost nothing to a substantial section in Congress, a substantial group in Congress. And if I'm not mistaken, I think today we see close allies of Bolsonaro's winning the governorships in 2 major states, Rio de Janeiro and Minas Gerais. So I'm just wondering, how isolated or not he's going to be within the institutions.
He's going to have a lot of problems. But remember that Mussolini and Hitler at the beginning also had no problems before establishing the dictatorship, especially Mussolini. It took a lot of time up the moment that Mussolini was in condition to establish his dictatorship. Bolsonaro is going to have lots of institutional problems. He's going to have problems with parliament. He's going to have problems with some sectors of judiciary power. He's going to have to fight against the social and popular resistance commanded by the Workers' Party. But he is trying to present a very deep change in Brazilian political life in order to establish this ultra-liberal agenda. He's trying to break the democratic role in Brazil, having it been since the return to democracy in the 80s. That is the danger Bolsonaro.
We were just talking with Fernando just now about to what extent the other phenomenon that we've seen, which is the very impressive growth of protests, demonstrations from many different sectors, originally led by women, but across the spectrum to evangelicals protesting against the rise of the far right. To what extent, what will be the role of that now?
Brazil, how? I mean, Bolsonaro was able to obtain 55% of voters. Haddad, supported by former President Lula, 45% of the population went to vote today. Of course, there is a lot of people, a lot of organizations, a lot of movements that are going to fight against Bolsonaro. Bolsonaro's life is not going to be easy as he wished it to be. It's going to have a lot of resistance. The political crisis in Brazil is going to be deeper and deeper. But we have to understand what Bolsonaro is saying in order to analyze its possibilities and problems, and in order to understand, I repeat, dangers of the arriving of Bolsonaro.
Breno, thank you so much for that. We appreciate having you on the show. Fernando, Breno was just telling us, sorry, I'm losing my camera. Breno was just telling us that the Bolsonaro is not like any other politician that we have seen. You can't compare him to Trump. You can't compare him to anyone else. That he is more definitely fascist. Do you agree with that? And two, what sort of impact do you think that he will have on the rest of Latin America? Because you're very concerned about what his election means for the region.
Yeah, well, he's very special in his kind, right? He's pro-gun, he has been praising the dictatorship period in Brazil from 1964 to 1985. He has been also praising dictators like Fujimori or like Pinochet. And that's actually very dangerous because we don't know if it's going to be also a setback in the advance of democracy.
Let me interrupt you a second. Yeah? The dictatorship was so recent. We keep seeing victims of the Brazilian dictatorship talking about how they were tortured.
Absolutely.
How is he able to use that as a positive when there's so many Brazilians who were either directly affected or their family members were directly affected? How does his words transcend their reality?
Together with, for example, Dilma Rousseff was a victim of that dictatorship herself. Well, I think that media has a lot to do with this. Like, we have to take into account that O Globo station has not attacked him at all. O Globo itself, as a station, collaborated with the dictatorship. The second biggest TV station, the Record TV, that is led by the evangelist, has support explicitly, continuously, Bolsonaro in TV. These victims of the dictatorship has been portrayed in many occasions as a minority of red people, also from a very negative perspective, and that this has done that many people has perceived Bolsonaro's scapegoats as good enough to vote for him. In a way, this sensationalism that has been imposed by the TV, by Bolsonaro, we have to remind also, to keep in mind that the poorest people are evangelical. And they have also done what their priests have told them to do, in a way. So I would say that even if it could be outrageous for many of us, Bolsonaro's statement, many people in Brazil still don't perceive reality as we do right now.
Okay. We have Chantal Moffat on the line. Chantal is an eminent political scientist who has written some of the most important texts on populism in Latin America. She's joining us from London. Hi, Chantal. Thank you so much for joining us. Hi, Chantal. Are you hearing?
Yes, I'm hearing.
Okay, so Chantal, I was just talking to my guest, Fernando Casado, about the election of Jair Bolsonaro. How is it that he has been able to find success in a country where he is praising the military dictatorship, and yet there are so many victims of the dictatorship still around? How has his words been able to reach a hold despite the reality that Brazilians know that they have either experienced or their family members have experienced?
Well, I think that the
problem comes from the way in which I think, for me me, the responsibility for the fact that Bolsonaro has been elected, it's due to the way in which, you know, the traditional political class has really made an incredible attack against the PT in order to discredit him, you know, discredit the party. And that all began with I think, you know, the impeachment of Dilma Rousseff. Because since then, of course, I mean, it was clear that the democratic institutions were not functioning in Brazil, because Dilma was definitively not responsible, I mean, for what she was criticized. And there was a campaign of vilification of the political class against the PT and against Lula, because they wanted to, you know, to get rid of the PT in order to come to power themselves. And I think that, you know, they are the one who are responsible for having fake news and such a campaign of vilification against the PT, that they have created an atmosphere in the country with people who have thought, well, you know, even, you know, if it's Bolsonaro, it doesn't problem. What we want to get rid of the PT. And of course, that was helped by the campaign in the social media and the press and all that. And I think that, you know, this has really backfired, because they wanted to in fact, maintain their power. And but it's evident that since what was really a legal coup against Dilma, then the whole democratic institution in Brazil have not been working, and that has created this feeling of rejection by the people of the political class. And this is something that Bolsonaro has been able to take advantage of, that, because, you know, people do not just act on basis of what has happened to them before and the fact that they've been remembering the dictatorship. And I think that is basically there's been a climate which has been created in Brazil of such a rejection and vilification.
Chantal, can I just jump in there a moment? Because I'm interested to know how you, from your theoretical perspective, includes how you characterize the phenomenon of Jair Bolsonaro. Because our previous guest was very emphatic, arguing that Jair Bolsonaro is not just another right-wing leader in Latin America. He explicitly described him as a fascist, and a movement behind him as a fascist movement. Now, do you share that characterization?
Yes, I do accept that completely. And I think, for instance, to present that as a tropical Trump, you know, is completely false. It's much more dangerous than that. And you know, I'm a person who has been, in fact, I've just finished a book on populism in which I'm attacking the people who are saying that, you know, right-wing populists are fascists. And I'm saying, no, one needs to distinguish between right-wing populism and fascism. For instance, I don't think that, you know, Marine Le Pen or basically the right-wing populists in Europe are fascists. But in the case of Bolsonaro, I would say yes, definitively, this is not, you know, like Salvini or like any other right-wing populist movement in Europe. This is really a fascist movement, because he's calling for violence. He definitively has no respect of democratic institution, you know. So this is really a phenomenon which I think is completely different from all the other form of right-wing populism, and is definitively much more dangerous than to compare with Trump. Is really poor, because Trump, of course, you know, did a lot of things wrong, but he's not somebody who is going to really to put in danger democratic institution in the U.S. And in fact, democratic institutions in the U.S. are stronger, of course, you know. So I think, no, definitively, I also agree that this is a fascist.
Chantal, I need to ask you, what will the election of Jair Bolsonaro mean for populism throughout Latin America? Because Brazil is such an influential country in this continent. And what is the role of the left wing in Brazil and throughout Latin America as a result of his election?
Well, honestly, I don't think that is going to, I mean, it's terrible, of course, for Brazil. It's not good at all for Latin America.
but I don't think that is going to really have much consequence in the sense of favoring government like that, because the government, I mean, we definitively are seeing a return of the right in Latin America. But for instance, Piñera in Chile or Macri in Argentina are right-wing government, but and of course, I'm very critical of them. But I think it's definitively not something that put the democracy in danger, as the case of Brazil. So, I think it's bad news, but it's not something which is going to really the origin of a new vague. I mean, the case of Brazil is particular, and I think one should not generalize. So there have been lots of people saying, oh, this is the populist wave, and that's no, I think that we should really understand the situation in Brazil, and this is why I was insisting that one needs to understand that in the context, of the attack against the PT. Look, it seems to me evident that if Lula had been able to be a candidate, he would have won. So in fact, all the people who impeded Lula, it was completely illegal what they did. That, of course, showed that the democratic institutions in Brazil were already under stress. And, of course, the result they have is Bolsonaro. But obviously, there's going to be, I hope, a reaction and some kind of unity of the democratic forces. In fact, something which I find really worrying is the fact that there's not been, this union of democratic forces against Bolsonaro, and that many so-called, center left or center right politicians did not call to voting for Assad.
Chantal, Chantal, I want to ask you a question, and actually then ask the same question to Fernando here, which is, what does the left in Brazil, in Latin America, indeed beyond, need to learn from what has just happened in Brazil, from this victory of an extremely right-wing populist or indeed fascist president? I mean, you mentioned just there, Chantal, that if Lula had stood, then he would have won, and that seems to be the case. But does that mean the left just needs to go back to what it was doing a few years ago, or does it need to learn different kinds of lessons?
No, of course. I mean, obviously, I think that when we are going to understand the reason for the crisis, I think the PT has got some responsibility, obviously, and this is where one needs to understand. But again, I insist that situations are different in each country, because it depends very much on the electoral system. And in fact, the system in Brazil is such that you can't really, you always need to make alliance with right-wing. For instance, the PMDB in Brazil, you can't have a government that is pure PT. You always have made alliance with them. So I think that basically, for instance, in the case of Brazil, what was needed was a reform of the electoral system, because this was something which really was problematic, and this also has some reason to explain why, for instance, the PT is not being able to implement kind of politics which would be more progressive. I remember, for instance, that when there were, it was at the moment 2014, I don't remember exactly, but there were demonstrations. It was around the time of the football, and Dilma, in fact, wanted, it was the Movimiento Pase Libre and demonstration which are basically in favor of, more democratic institutions, and Dilma wanted to she presented a project like that, but she was impeded by her own government, So in fact, that is something which, and I'm not going to say that the PT didn't make any mistake, obviously, but the vilification and for instance, look, the whole question of corruption, this is something that was in fact widespread in Brazil, but only the people of the PT were accused. All the other parties were completely, left aside. I mean, one of the problems, of course,
the way in which the judiciary in Brazil is totally politicized, and it was on the side of the opposition to the PT, you know. So there is a lot of things. In fact, I think that from that point of view, something similar is happening a little bit in Argentina, because in Argentina they are also trying to impeach Cristina to be a candidate, you know, in the next election, and they are also trying to find ways in which they will put her in jail. So the judicial system, you know, is not very impartial in Argentina either.
Chantal, just let me pass that question on to Fernando then. The lessons for the left, Fernando.
I would say that the first lesson is that next time the left gets the power, they will have to focus on empowering people. No? The awareness of the people is very important in civil society. Right now we have seen that perhaps because sometimes there was not enough trust in people, there was not enough empowerment, and this is what happens when you don't believe that people can handle their lives, right? Then also for the specific case of Brazil, I would say that, and these are mistakes that now Lula acknowledges, is that, for example, he didn't change the communication law in Brazil. That was really important. A virtual monopoly of the media by the group O Globo has really, really damaged a lot Lula and the cultural hegemony that this huge media group has over the population in Brazil. Also, I would say that and now Lula wanted to introduce it into his electoral program, but he could not run for the presidency in Brazil, is a new constitution to call for a national assembly, because right now a constituent assembly, because right now you see in Brazil, for example, that all these different institutions and the different powers, especially legislative and the judiciary, are really conservative, and it's really difficult to be able to have a stable government, since you have really many parties that have in different regions power.
But there's a real dilemma for the left there, isn't there? Because I mean that's what the Workers' Party faced when Lula first came to power. They didn't have the kind of majority in Congress that would enable them to put into practice all their policies, their full program. So they had to compromise in order to build alliances and build some kind of majority in the institutions. And then, of course, they're not doing what they said they were going to do, and they begin to, you know, that erodes their credibility.
Absolutely. And that's the trap of the system. That's why you have to change the system. This representative democracy we have right now in Brazil is not working anymore if you really want to pass deep reforms that are going to really change the state. That's why the Constituent Assembly was so important to pass in Brazil. That's why Lula realized, too late probably, and wanted to pass a reform, a deep reform with a new constitutions, because right now nothing can be done, and you really have to reform the state if you want to pass laws that wants to transform the reality in Brazil. If you really want to tackle the social situation of poverty and different measures you really have to pass in a country like Brazil.
Well, Fernando, so what is the prescription for the left right now in the immediate future? And maybe Chantal, I can get Chantal to answer this question after Fernando has responded. What is the solution for the left? How should they respond now?
I really think that we have to reorganize from the base. Right now also a really big problem of the PT, and that was exploited very well by media, was the corruption issue, the lawfare, how to prosecute people because of political interest, but based on figures, image that you create, like the corruption discourse that was really effective for Bolsonaro, for example. Then what you really have to do is to empower people, as I was saying before, to reorganize the people from the base. And then if we ever have the chance to take power away again, you really have to change the democratic system. If we still base our actions on this representative liberal democracy, it's going to be very difficult to really transform the system, and we probably will lose faith of the people, because people will say, as Ian was saying before, that the reform or the promises that the left had proposed were not being fulfilled, at the same time that media or the conservative powers are attacking continuously these governments and posing as the first main topic corruption, and also again discrediting this party. So I really think that has to be a participatory democracy to change the system.
Let's just throw that back to Chantal. Chantal, is it possible? Is it possible for the left to win office, win power through the democratic process and use the existing institutions to make the changes it wants to make?
Well, first I want to say that I agree with everything that Fernando said concerning, you know, the press and the institution. But I don't. It depends what you understand by changing the system, because I don't believe, for instance, that one needs to absolutely abandon representative democracy and put something completely different. I think that there are many different ways in which representative democracy can work. And of course, in Brazil, you know, the really existing democracy, representative democracy does not work. But I don't think that it means that one is got to abolish completely this system and establish, I don't know, you know, what kind of, well, definitively the electoral system must change, the question of the judiciary, the question of the press. There are many important reforms that need to be done. But it's not some kind of revolution that will, you know, end liberal representative democracy and establish something different. Of course, the problem in Brazil today is that if those reforms have not been possible under a more progressive government, it's going to be extremely difficult now, obviously, because in fact what Bolsonaro is going to try to do is to, in fact, make the system much more authoritarian and much less democratic. So this is really coming the challenge for the left, you know. And it's very, very important, I think, that to organize the level of the social movement. Basically, at the moment, what needs to be organized is the resistance, you know, the resistance. And all the social movement, all the things need to try to establish contact among themselves and try to see if, you know, they can, I would say at the moment, is instead of trying to completely transform the institution, which they are not in condition to do, what they need to do is to impede the form of authoritarianism that Bolsonaro is going to try to do. So that is why I insist it's a moment of resistance, you know. This is really
Thank you so much for your comments. It should be interesting to see what form that resistance shall take. So we have to end soon, so I want to throw that question to Fernando. We have been talking about how Bolsonaro and the right wing have been using media. We haven't really addressed that, and we don't have a lot of time. So I'm going to give you kind of like a final thought. How should the left, or what needs to be done to help the media transmit the proper information, you know, because we were saying, like, clearly we were saying that one side in Brazil had a dominance and their message was able to push through. So what is it the left does not understand about the media that the right clearly does?
Yeah, in Brazil they should have been really very aware of the danger of the media monopoly of O Globo, and that has not been done, and it's going to be very, very difficult right now to get space in that media. If you really want to pass messages right now in Brazil, this hegemonic media is never going to let you pass through. So what you have to do...
What about social media?
Yeah,
because we saw Bolsonaro using social media. Now...
Social media and hegemonic media also as well.
Okay.
Like as I was saying before, Record TV was really doing a campaign very explicitly in favor of Bolsonaro, and it's the second biggest TV channel. At the same time, O Globo was not attacking Bolsonaro. But now for the left, the only alternative probably is to use the social media in order to really create a different discourse against the hegemonic powers.
And unfortunately, we have run out of time, but I think that is a discussion that we probably need to spend more time in, because a lot of the conversation has been about how the right wing is able to take hold and use whatever tools, whether it's traditional media or social media, to get their message across, and the left just does not seem as capable. But that is it for us at the moment at Telesur English headquarters in Quito, Ecuador. Thank you for watching Brazil Decides. We'll see you next time.